Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and this is part 16 of my Witchwood card review. And I guess Blizzard was saving all the good cards for the end because there are some ridiculously awesome cards, really strong stuff in this review. 5 new cards. If you don't have time, of course, you can hit the quick reviews link in the description to skip to the end to see the cards and my 5-star ratings. Otherwise, let's go ahead and jump into my detailed reviews. So up first here, let's talk about Tess Greymane, the new rogue legendary minion. This is basically Yogg-Saron 2.0. Tess Greymane's an 8-mana 6/6. Her battle cry reads, replay every card from another class you've played this game, targets chosen randomly. So that's right, any card that you've managed to burgle into your hand from the opponent's class using things like, Swashbuckler in the past or in wild format. You've also got things like Hallucinate or Pickpocket, the new Echo card as well. In fact, the next card in this review is another new way to burgle your opponent's cards into your hand. Any of those that you play, you'll play them into the game, they'll do their thing. Maybe it's a minion that goes and dies. You cast a spell, you equip a weapon, perhaps even. All of those things, no matter when they happen previously in the game, as soon as you drop Tess Greymane, those cards are getting replayed. So the weapon is being re-equipped. The minions are being resummoned. The spells are being recast with random targets. And that is going to be absolutely chaotic sometimes, particularly when it comes to spells. There's a mini Yogg-Saron, essentially, every time Tess Greymane happens. But perhaps even more interestingly is there's a little mini N'Zoth as well, in that it summons you a board of stuff. Not Death Rattle specifically, but a board of stuff. So it's almost like Tess Greymane is an 8-mana N'Zoth and Yogg-Saron bundled all into one. And I think it's pretty obvious that's going to be an amazing play most of the time. Like, that's going to work out in your favor way more often than it works out against you. Just because of a couple things. First and foremost, it's not unidirectional like N'Zoth and Yogg-Saron. It actually does spells and minions and theoretically weapons and perhaps even Death Knights as well. Remember, it just says cards. So there's a lot of different ways to sort of bank your resources in different pools so that, like, you're not putting all of your eggs in one basket. So if you get a Death Knight, for instance, you're not susceptible to board removal. If you get a big board, you're not as worried about random spells targeting random stuff because you have more minions as opposed to like Yogg-Saron killing itself right away. So since you're spreading out your resources a little bit, it makes it just a safer, lower risk play. Despite all the chaos still ensuing, there's more likelihood that you're going to end up with some things that you want. A couple minions, couple favorable spell rolls, maybe a Death Knight or a good weapon. So Tess Greymane, most of the time, is going to work out nicely. On top of that, if you're running Tess Greymane in your deck and you're accruing all of these burgled spells from other classes, then essentially that means you know what you're going to get when Tess Greymane goes off. You know the cards you've played previously. And in fact, you don't even have to play a card. Like if you know, for instance, that you don't want to run a Twisting Nether into your Tess Greymane, then you just never play the Twisting Nether to bank that value to make sure that you're not going to destroy your Tess Greymane board if you've previously played a few Void Lords or whatever that you want to keep around. So essentially, it gives you a little bit of control back. In all that chaos, you have influence and power over the chaos, which you never really had with the Yogg-Saron, which was totally random. This isn't quite so random. Beyond that, Tess Greymane is only 8 mana, which is, of course, way less than Yogg-Saron and N'Zoth, so you can combo out some other things with Tess Greymane, maybe clean up a little bit of a mess if she caused anything, kill that remaining minion, equip a hero power, whatever you need to do. You've got some time and mana left. You could theoretically play her faster as well. I don't know how useful that's going to be. It depends on how quickly you can burgle and play cards to get a return with Tess Greymane, but if you had to, you could play her on turn 8 as well. Now, clearly, I think it's almost undebatable that when this card hits the board, good things are going to happen. It's going to be a strong play, a huge swing turn, very influential. It's going to be crazy, but most of the time very good. And it's going to do a lot and add a lot of value. The question becomes, of course, is Burgle Rogue going to be any good? Because if Burgle Rogue, if, getting cards from your opponent's class isn't an archetype that makes sense, if it's not well supported, if it's not competitive, then Tess Greymane's not going to be competitive, right? And That's a possibility. I don't know. Burgle Rogue has never been particularly successful before. It's never been a high tier deck. It's something people played for fun and occasionally was okay, but never won a ton of games. Almost regardless of that, though, I think it's obvious that Tess Greymane is going to be amazing when she hits the board. So in other words, like, yeah, Burgle Rogue could be a tier 4 deck, but Tess Greymane is going to be the best card in the deck. It's going to be the defining card. It's going to win games when it's played. So I think almost regardless of whether or not the archetype makes sense, Tess Greymane is a great card. She's so strong, does a ridiculous amount of stuff. You have to say this card is good, even if she belongs to a failed archetype, which is not always the case, but sometimes it is. Like Kingsbane, for instance, it's a great card, even though Mill Rogue is like a tier 4 deck with a 45% win rate. It's not a great deck, guys, honestly. Kingsbane Rogue is okay in Wild, but in Standard in particular, hasn't been the best deck. Like, yeah, occasionally some people can play it super successfully, but for the vast majority of Hearthstone players, Kingsbane Rogue is kind of bad. But that doesn't mean Kingsbane's a bad card. Kingsbane's a pretty solid card, obviously, and I think taking that exact same logic with Tess Greymane, she's going to be an awesome card no matter what the deck does. And frankly, I'm still a little bit hopeful for the deck too. So maybe Tess Greymane will bring Burgle Rogue back to life finally. I can't wait to see it. Maybe even Lillian Voss will be good finally to empower something like Tess Greymane. Sounds amazing. I love this card. I love the chaos. I love the font. I love the design. Here is to Burgle Rogue. Let's finally make it a success, Blizzard. So up next here, we have another Rogue card to support that Burgle style of play. This is the Blink Fox. Incredibly beautiful card, I have to say. The color scheme there is fantastic. And this is a 3-mana, 3/3 beast. And the battle cry reads, add a random card to your hand from your opponent's class. So this is essentially exactly Swashbuckler, just times 3. It's 3 mana, it's a 3/3, and it's a beast instead of a pirate. And Swashbuckler was a great card for Rogue. It was helped, of course, by patches, but still, Swashbuckler made sense even in Miracle lists, sometimes outside of the patches world. Just because, you know, it cycled you into a resource, it got a little body on board. I think for all those same reasons, the Blink Fox will also be a very strong card. I think it's just a 3/3 for 3 is fine. We've seen that before with things like Curious Glimmerroot, awesome card for Priest. Blink Fox is basically exactly that. It just gives you a random card from your opponent's class. Now, it's a little worse technically, theoretically, because it's not from their deck, and sometimes, you know, or usually, always, in fact, your opponent is running cards in their deck that are better than every card in their class. In other words, you know, bad cards aren't included in decks. So, of course, Blink Fox or any other Burgle-style card can occasionally hit those Totemic Mites, to use the staple example there, which are not, you know, that doesn't happen with Curious Glimmerroot, essentially. But regardless of that, because of the additional synergies that exist for Burgle Rogue, because of all the other ways this can empower cards like Tess Greymane, for instance, clearly I think Blink Fox makes a lot of sense. It looks very strong. Good stats, good effect, card draw / card generation at barely any penalty at all to this card's stats. Even when you compare this to something like Black Cat we saw previously for Mage, which looks really similar, except that it just draws you a card from your deck, which is normally better. This card doesn't have a condition like Black Cat did. You could stick this in any deck and still know that you're guaranteed to get that value. So I like Blink Fox better than even something like Black Cat, which I thought was a fairly good card too. Basically, Blink Fox looks very strong. A lot to love about this one. I think this will absolutely see some play. So now let's move on to some Mage cards, starting off with the new Legendary here. This is Archmage Arugal, a new 2-mana 2/2 that reads, whenever you draw a minion, add a copy of it to your hand, which is a crazy strong effect as far as I'm concerned. It's something we actually did see previously, or closely anyway, with Chromagus from Blackrock Mountain, but that was an 8-mana 6/8 minion, and it was so darn expensive that, you know, you kind of had to play Chromagus and hope it lived for a turn to reap any of the benefits in the future, because you didn't have any mana left, or very, very little mana left at least, to draw any cards after playing Chromagus. So it was really hard to get that immediate return on your investment. And of course, as a giant threat minion, people were like, oh my god, I gotta kill Chromagus, so they would of course do everything in their power to kill it before you got any extra cards out of it. So that's why Chromagus never really worked. But with Arugal here, this dude is only 2 mana, which means you can play Archmage and play a ton of card draw cards right alongside it. I think the two most obvious options that come to mind for Mage The old standard Arcane Intellect, that's amazing. If that draws you 2 minions, then of course that would really draw you 4 minions with Archmage Arugal on board. 4 minions for 3 mana is awesome. And then there's the new card, Book of Specters, which draws you 3 cards, and if they're minions, they don't get discarded. So this, of course, would then copy those 3 minions, drawing you 6 cards for an additional 2 mana on top of Archmage Arugal, or in total, a 2/2 for 4 mana that draws you 6 cards, which is just a ridiculous return on your investment. That is absolutely outrageous. 6 cards is absurd. And clearly you can start to see how quickly the draw value from Arugal snowballs out of control. This thing is an absurd draw engine. And of course, if you're running minions that are good and have active and instant effects, then Arugal is going to empower your hand to do some really cool stuff. I think the most obvious, utilizations for this are in a minion-based mage deck, and right now it looks like the best way to play a minion-based mage would be elementals. Just getting those elementals and all those nice new battle cries into your deck, giving you a consistent source of elementals so you can continue to activate elemental chains turn after turn. Arugal fits all of that beautifully. Not to mention that because these cards that Arugal is generating, the additional cards being added to your hand, did not start in your deck, then things like Leyline Manipulator, the elemental mage the mage elemental that discounts cards in your hand that didn't start in your deck, guess what? Those get discounted now. The Arugal cards get discounted. So even more synergies with Elemental Mage. I just can't talk about how awesome I think this is. Now, I will say that one challenge perhaps for something like this, if you were to try to fit this into a really aggressive deck, drawing a ton of extra cards super fast doesn't always help if you don't have the time or mana to play them all. Like, you've got to be able to put those cards into effect. So I think this probably fits more of a mid-range style better, where you're just looking to refill your hand at some point and keep putting down mid-sized minions and threat after threat that your opponent, of course, can't answer. Another perhaps small downside to Arugal is that he's obviously not the best on-curve 2-mana play. This is something that's going to come out later in the game. Clearly, you don't want to play a 2/2 on 2. It'd be fine if you were absolutely desperate and had to. It's okay. It trades into stuff in the early game reasonably well. That Keleseth body, essentially. But you're very unlikely for this to ever stick into like a turn 3 draw where you'd follow it up. So I don't think you want to preemptively try to get this onto the board for the next turn setup like you used to do with Cro-Magus. We saw how big of a struggle that was, and with only 2 health, that's an even bigger risk with Arugal, just because your opponent will almost certainly have some way to kill this thing if you did that on turn 2. So it's really more about saving this one as a resource. So it's true that it could get stuck in your hand a little bit. If you draw this in the mulligan, you may not want to play this till turn 4 or turn 5 to combo out with some of those card draw options. But when that happens, it's going to be like this super divine favor that's just generating you extra resources that I think will be very, very powerful. So I have a lot of hope for this card. Clearly, again, much like Tess, it's conditional. It's only going to work in a certain kind of deck successfully. It's not going to fit into a very spell-based deck. It's just going to be hard to get the value out of Arugal or the consistency out of Arugal. So yes, it's true that if a minion-based mage does not find success, that Arugal also would fail. But again, I think you can just see the raw strength of the card. He does some really cool stuff. He has a very powerful effect. So again, regardless of whether or not the deck works, I think this card is awesome. So now let's talk about another strong mage card, and in fact another elemental mage card. This is the Bonfire Elemental. It is a new 5-mana 5/5 with a battle cry that reads, if you played an elemental last turn, draw a card. So the normal elemental activation effect in action here, you had to have played an elemental, chain those elementals together. If you get that off, you get a really nice 5/5 that draws you a card. That's sort of a super Azure Drake. Azure Drake had spell damage, of course. This card doesn't, but the real value in Azure Drake was that mid-range body that cycled into a new card. Bonfire Elemental is the perfect version of that also has its own elemental synergies, of course, keeping that chain moving into the next turn. So I think it's quite clear that in an elemental deck, this card would fit wonderfully. A 5/5 stat line is fantastic trades very well. This reminds me a bit of Draconid Operative, frankly, that just big mid-bodied minion that is turning a new card into your hand. Now, granted, it's not generating a card out of thin air like Operative. It's not giving you the informational assets that Operative provided or the ability to steal really cool stuff from your opponent. So not as good as Draconid Operative, but it serves that same sort of role, right? Just getting a big body down and keeping your hand refilled for a mid-range deck to find additional resources to just keep up the pressure. So I like Bonfire Element a lot. Not the best card we've ever seen, not that operative level, but just really, really good. And I think Elemental Mage is trending towards success with some of these other cards that we've seen. There's already a lot of good elementals available to Mage, including at the 4-mana spot. There's some good other neutral 5-mana options as well, some good 7-mana stuff. So this one is in the right range as far as fitting into a curve and making sense for the deck, and it's got a good stat line. So a lot to like about this one. One of those cards that just looks good from every angle. The synergy, the stats, the effect, all fantastic. So I think this is, once again, another really strong card. So finally here we have one last card. This is the Arcane Keysmith, again for Mage. A 4-mana 2/2 that reads, Battlecry, discover a secret, and put it into the battlefield. So you can pretty quickly break this one down essentially by its parts and its mana cost. If secrets cost 3 mana, then that means 3 mana of this is attributed to the secret being played, and essentially the remaining 1 mana is attributed to the 2/2 body. And yes, a 2/2 body is pretty solid for 1 mana, obviously, with things like Enchanted Raven. We've seen that in the past. But of course, a 2/2 on turn 4, not all that impactful. It's the sort of thing that just kind of lingers around. Doesn't really influence the board all that directly. But of course, you're getting the secret too. And hey, sure, secrets can be good. The one downside with discovering a secret, of course, you don't always get what you want or what you've planned. You have a little bit of control. You can pick the thing that most immediately affects the board or serves your deck's purpose. But sometimes that will backfire on you. So a little bit of consistency issues there. Also, when I look at this card and I think about who wants to run this, what kind of deck utilizes a card like this? Is it an aggressive card? Is it a control card? Does it fit into a mid-range deck? When I ask that question, I can't really find the answer. I think pretty quickly you can determine that this is not a super aggressive secret mage sort of card like we've seen in the past with Kirin Tor Mage. That's a so much faster tempo play that does, of course, sacrifice some cards in your hand, but you're okay with that in Secret Mage because you're looking to get those aggressive stats on board at that 4 attack. You're looking to put a lot of stuff into play quickly so you can kill your opponent really, really fast. Arcane Keysmith doesn't do that. It's a much weaker body. It's a slower play. It's willing to keep some cards in your hand essentially to make a slower tempo play than something like Kirin Tor Mage because you're spending 1 card to get that secret and that body as opposed to using 2 cards to do that. So you might say, oh, well, maybe it's a control card then because clearly it's more concerned with value and maintaining a hand size. But then you look at Arcane Keysmith and it's like, well, just running a secret would almost be as good as Arcane Keysmith. Do I really care about an extra 2/2 minion in a value-based deck when I could just run the secret of choice that I want? So I don't know if control really fits very well with it either. It just doesn't seem to add enough value compared to other things you could run at the 4-mana slot or any sort of mid-range slot, frankly. So then you say, well, is it a mid-range card? And I guess it can be. It's fine. But secrets, particularly somewhat random secrets, have not historically proven to be the strongest plays in Hearthstone. The reason secrets have been good recently is because of all the tempo advantages they offer via Kirin Tor Mage and Cabal Lackey and Cabal Shadow Priest. Without that, secrets by themselves just aren't that good. They're sometimes very easy for opponents to play around. They don't do what you want. The consistency issues, again, of the randomness. So I don't even know if this makes sense in a mid-range deck either. There is the possibility that this could be played in an all-minion deck. We've obviously seen hints before with Archmage Arugal, a handful of other cards that a minion mage might be on the way where you don't run spells. And this would be a way for you to run spells in a minion mage deck. But do you really care about secrets again? I don't know why you need to run secrets in a minion deck. I think I'd rather just run a better minion at the 4-mana spot. So essentially, this card just doesn't seem to line up in any way to play the game to me. I don't know who wants to play this or what sort of value it offers. Why are you running this card over so many other options? It just seems a little bit lackluster. It's not doing quite enough. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with it. It's the sort of card that would be fine in an arena draft, I'm sure. That's totally cool. But at Constructed, it just doesn't seem to be unique enough or strong enough to make the cut for any given list that I can think of. Okay, so that wraps it up for my detailed reviews. Now what I'd like to do is jump into my quick reviews where I rate these cards from 1 to 5 stars. Tess Greymane is a 5-star card. Blink Fox is a 4-star card. Archmage Arugal is a 5-star card. Bonfire Elemental is a 4-star card. Arcane Keysmith is a 2-star card. There you go, guys. Part 16 of my card review is done. We're nearing the end. Only, I think, a couple new, maybe 3 new reviews left to go. It's pretty exciting. We've seen most of the cards. In fact, I've actually seen 2 Legendaries leaked that I wasn't able to put in this review because I am not 100% sure they're real, although I'm like 99% sure they're real. So a lot of stuff to come that looks really, really cool. I really do feel like Blizzard saved the best for last. But what do you guys think? Did I overrate the cards in this set? I was really, really happy with both of these Legendaries. I'm curious if you think I went overboard. Will these archetypes work? Was I wrong? Was I right? Share all your thoughts in the comments below. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, game on.